examining the intersection between gaming and extremism. Oh goody, another one of these. Study number 6247, do video games make tinny violence? As that is basically what this is, but with a current year paint job. Hell, even the research paper itself recognizes this and swiftly moves to swipe its own legs out from underneath it by pointing to the fact that exhaustive studies on the link between video games and violence have been carried out for 3 decades now. You've almost got to admire the grift at this point. 30 years we've been trying to figure out if there is any correlation, any link whatsoever between video games and violence, and for 30 years we've come up with the same old, no, we can't seem to find anything, and yet we are still doing it. With the only conclusion ever reached being that we need more research. So say the people getting a paycheck from aforementioned research. You'd hardly think it the most subtle ploy in the universe, but, well, again, it has worked for 30 years, so I suppose we can't underestimate it. And honestly, there is almost no point in even responding to something like this now, were it not for the, fresh angle that this United Nations research paper adopts, as there is yet another fresh crop of government-employed pseudo-intellectuals, super government in this case, I suppose, in desperate need of research grants, and so here we go again with aforementioned fresh angle, focusing not on the violence part, but on the violent extremism part. And this, in all due likelihood, is because the whole do video games make you violent debate is about as dead and settled as anything can ever get in the scientific community, which more and more I think is simply just one enormous goddamn circle jerk, but hey, details. And incidentally... See, okay, the reason why I decided to talk about this study is not because of the study's conclusion or anything, which is the same conclusion as every other study of this kind ever, that more research is needed. Again, so says the people getting a paycheck from the goddamn research. But what is interesting is what the study doesn't say, and apparently completely ignores rather than what it actually does say. In fact, the researchers stumble upon the reason for their study almost immediately, and then simply wanders on past it. Okay, extremism in video gaming. One of the reasons why there are more extremists, quote-unquote, in the video game community is because the video game community is goddamn hilariously massive. Obviously, they adopt the widest possible definition of gamer, so that a full, well, half of Earth's population are gamers. So already, you've cast the net wide enough to include a couple of extremists, unsurprisingly. They also mentioned some of the famous ones, like the Christchurch shooting, for example, as a person who was very clearly familiar with gaming culture. Now, that was not what radicalized him, and we know this because he told us in his manifesto. It was France and how it wasn't very French anymore that tipped him over the edge, but we're already skirting dangerously close to the YouTube's terms of service, so let's move swiftly on from that point, shall we? They also bring up the Norwegian terrorist, Anders Behring Breivik, and they mention that apparently he trained to kill in Call of Duty, which is a liberal interpretation of what he actually said, as yes, he did use Call of Duty to, quote, train, but it wasn't training how to kill, it was training on how to use holographic and reflex sights because, well, Norwegian gun laws are very strict, and he wasn't very likely to get his hands on one of those without significant risk, shall we say. But the actual reason that they happen upon is in this snippet here. They talk about how gaming communities are a hotbed of problematic content like non-PC humor. Oh no. Sexism, misogyny, xenophobia. You know, the usual laundry list, just add on the isms as you go. And they mention that this is more so prevalent on gaming-adjacent platforms like Discord, etc., than on the, quote, strictly moderated social media. And apparently, the extremists then, quote, building on existing grievances in these gaming communities, push their ideas. So what you're telling me is, you've happened upon the last refuge, last safe space, if you will, of people who have socially unacceptable humor. People who are already targeted and persecuted on every other platform, and after having been censored, chastised, and outright deleted from Twitter, Google, Facebook, Twitch, etc., they are now, after having been driven completely into a corner, vulnerable to extremist groupings. My God, what a shock and a surprise. And thus, obviously, the solution is more moderation. It's actually kind of beautiful. These people are researchers, and their conclusion is, the iron fist must squeeze tighter, comrade. There are still some who think the wrong's out there. It's almost depressing at this point that in this entire research paper, again, the professional researchers don't even entertain the notion that maybe, just maybe, you would catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Perhaps if you didn't actively try to crush these people, they wouldn't seek the only outlet they could find. Perhaps if you didn't make humorous posts or anti-feminist content a literal crime, for which your entire online persona could be wiped from the internet, people wouldn't have to create private groups to share them. Not to mention, we've already categorized half of Earth's population as gamers. At this point, if we are actually believing what the researchers are finding and that gamers are a hotbed of these things, well, this isn't a fringe idea anymore. This is, if anything, the majority. But anywho, this is hardly a difficult concept, right? If you literally force people to go underground and subdivide themselves into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller groupings and echo chambers for the high sin of not liking modern-day third-wave feminism, then you are going to end up with a lot of people having very strong feelings on the subject of feminism. Banning a thing, you see, making it a taboo, does not destroy it. It near universally strengthens it. But the interviewees, the experts they gathered for this topic, which we've been looking at now, would never even... the thought wouldn't even occur to them, as they are precisely the kind of people you would expect them to be, having apparently suffered backlash for their activism. In other words, these are the precise same type of petty tyrants that caused all of this mess in the first place and started driving people underground. But the experts really have any expertise to provide, at the very least not in this scenario, so let us look at the actual survey instead for some pieces of gold. I do, by the way, adore the fact that, again, these professional researchers feel the need to mention that their 74% male survey, quote, do not reflect the fact that 40% of gamers are female. Half of all gamers are women, but this massive United Nations survey could only find 15%. Logic, tragically, not the strong suit of today's crop of researchers, it seems. But again, details. The gamers then went on, apparently to complain about gaming being a waste of time, and that it kept them from doing more important things. Gamers. But the biggest problem, obviously, was that far too many people online were just too damn mean to the LGBTQs and the women's. The participants were also exposed to vile language like, "You're gay," or "You play like a girl." Actual, genuine schoolyard banter. How will they survive? But wait, there is more. For, I think, here's the thing. The main problem here is apparently that the participants had only recently started hanging out online during the COVID pandemic, making gaming their primary source of social interactions. In other words, this is a case of many normies waddling onto the internet for the first time and being shocked and confused by the social norms and etiquette of someplace other than Starbucks. As apparently, "You're gay" is a shocking homophobic slur to these people. Or, perhaps, and here's the interesting part as well, this has more to do with the researchers' classification of things rather than the participants. As a little later on, they asked the participants how much content they had come across that they would deem, quote, "hateful or violent." And 62% said little or none, and only 14% said a lot. Meaning that most of the participants recognized "you're gay" for what it is, the modern day equivalent of a "your mama" joke. The researchers themselves were shocked and confused about this, and figured that maybe more research was needed. Ka-ching. As to why they don't consider "you're gay" to be hateful or violent. So in the end, all this survey provided us with, just like the few thousand other surveys just like it, was that people on the internet occasionally use mean words, particularly in very competitive or PvP games. Yet again, I am shocked and confused. And the taxpayer-funded United Nations researchers have no idea why people would be mean in these environments. Oh. I think I'm going to have to quote one of the respondents here to illustrate my point of view. Quote, "UN boomers are cringe and gay." That is an excellent reply. That is actually a genuinely excellent reply. And to top it off, the researchers were very confused as to why this kind of a troll response was submitted. It's like, could this be to upset us? I don't know, Sherlock, but you might be onto something there. It's entirely possible. And in the end, of course, as I mentioned already, no conclusion can be reached except that more money will be needed for the researchers, of course. Because, well, producing 30 pages of gobbledygook can't be cheap after all. Gotta keep the lights on somehow. Oh, and of course, the solution to all of these problems is more censorship. Oh yes, of course. Over half, 62% of people in the United Nations test said that extremism online was not a problem. Hateful and violent content was not an issue, and only 14% were ideologically indoctrinated enough to find a lot of problems, and yet the solution is stricter censorship, driving an even larger percentage of people even deeper underground. And hey, this is hardly a shocking conclusion. In fact, sitting here now, I am almost like, why the hell do we even bother? Why is there even any point in bringing up a survey like this and pointing out the insanity? And yes, there is, because, well, we have been doing a lot of winning recently. We genuinely have. Like, I am extraordinarily relieved of the PayPal firestorm of the last few days, for example, that saw yet another genuinely awful piece of legislation via terms of service actually slapped down. And I cannot help but be a little optimistic when I see stuff like that. But it is also important to remain realistic. It is also important to remember that enormous, multinational, supranational organizations like the United Nations is spending millions of dollars on research like these, who, again, they don't even come up with a conclusion at the end of the day, other than, this isn't the conclusion that we wanted. Let's do it again and see if we can't find a higher percentage of, quote, violent and hateful content. And they do this for no other reason but to try and further censor you. All this is a 30-page document attempting to find some sort of justification that they can bring to the gaming companies, to the social media platforms, and go, aha, look at this! You've got to crack down on this harder because, well, you see, the violent extremists are on your website, and, 1 in 10 people find that mildly disturbing. Again, it is important to remember this is the kind of people we are up against, and to just remind yourself of the ridiculous disparity in world views between the quote-unquote us, our side, and theirs. As there is surely no way actual educated people can be so blind as to not see the writing on the wall. Or, well, there's the trick, isn't it? Perhaps it is precisely because of their education that they're completely blind to the logic that is writ so large in front of them. An interesting point to think about, isn't it? Anywho, a little dose of reality there for everyone, in case we're getting a little bit too optimistic. You can thank me later, but until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.